Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing Breaches of the Week. And before I begin, as always, I'd like to thank the following people that sent me a lot of this information, and a lot of people did this week. It was a bonkers week. And so, David Walker, Chris Fellon, Jason Dance, Richard Reefer, Sanders Slidnerek, Jacqueline Wolf, and Barrett Peterson. Thank you so very much for everything that you sent in. This was a huge help. And let's dive right in, because this week, like I said, was crazy. And we are going to start with Memorial Health System, because 4 clinics, including hospitals Marietta Memorial, Selby General, and Sisterville General, in the Marietta, basically Parkersburg metropolitan area in West Virginia and Ohio, essentially got hit. Now, early last Sunday, basically Memorial Health System experienced a ransomware attack that basically hindered 3 hospitals' ability to operate normally. Dozens of hospitals and clinics in West Virginia and Ohio are canceling surgeries, diverting ambulances, all that kind of stuff. Now, the attackers appear to have stolen databases belonging to 200,000 patients, which include sensitive details such as social security numbers, names, and dates of birth. This is not the first time in the last month or so we've heard of hospitals having to divert ambulances, and I will say it again, if any one of those people in an ambulance dies because they had to go further out, basically the attackers are guilty of murder. Moving on, let's talk about the United States' no-fly and terror watch list. This is a rather controversial thing back in the day, basically a no-fly list for suspected terrorists. In July of this year, basically, security researcher Bob Diachenko came across basically a whole bunch of records in an exposed Elasticsearch cluster, and essentially what he found was 1.9 million, basically a record set containing sensitive information on people, including their names, country of basically the citizenship of the country, gender, date of birth, passport details, and no-fly status. The exposed server was also indexed by search engines Census and Zoomeye, so it's very possible that Diachenko was not the only one to come across this list. The Terrorist Screening Database, or TSC, basically, this watch list is highly controversial. So, for example, the ACLU has basically spent many years fighting against this essentially secret government no-fly list that doesn't have due process. And so there you go. It got exposed. I'm wondering if the ACLU has a copy and will use that in court against the U.S. government. Moving on, let's talk about the Indiana Department of Health. Now, if you've been part of any kind of COVID contact tracing in the state of Indiana, some of your personal information could be at risk because the Department of Health is notifying 750,000 people that their names, addresses, emails, and birth dates were accessed. The state said that basically a company is the one that accesses information, and they've agreed to destroy all of that information. They don't collect social security numbers for contact tracing, but apparently one of the third parties they use got all of that data and said, okay, we will destroy it. There you go. Huge problem. Moving on. Let's talk about AT&T, because AT&T said that they did not suffer a data breach after a well-known threat actor claimed to be selling a database containing the personal information of 70 million AT&T customers. Now, this threat actor, known as Shiny Hunters, and I've mentioned them here before, began selling this database yesterday on a known hacking forum with a starting price of $200,000 and incremental offers, above that of $30,000, meaning increments if you're bidding. Now, the attacker states that they're willing to sell it immediately for $1 million. So heads up to you. AT&T, AT&T customers, I should say. Shiny Hunters is a known hacking group, and it would be very weird if they started lying all of a sudden after they've had so many successful and true data breaches. So there you go. Moving on, let's talk about American banking and financial giant JP Morgan Chase. They are warning customers in Montana that a technical glitch may have basically presented their personal data to other customers. Now, this malfunction allowed users of the website chase.com or the Chase mobile app to view the banking information of other customers whose personal details were similar for nearly 2 months earlier this year. Data that might have been compromised includes customer names, accounts, account balances, and details of their transactions. So if you're a Chase customer or a JP Morgan Chase customer in Big Sky country, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about T-Mobile's evolving data breach situation. Now, this is nuts. The news about T-Mobile's latest data breach is only getting worse as the company announced new details from its investigation. If you recall, they said, we're going to investigate it, but we don't think we got hit for like 40 million records or whatever. Oh no, here we go. Now, Well, someone in possession of the leaked data said that they had obtained the information for as many as 100 million customers, including driver's license info, IMEI numbers, and more. T-Mobile's first statement put that figure at 47 million, and they also did not mention IMEI or IMSI data. Now, T-Mobile is confirmed for the 7.8 million on-contract or post-paid customers it already counted in the breach. Stolen data includes the information that they mention, which is first and last name, date of birth, social security number, driver's license, and ID, as well as IMEI and IMSI information. Now, if you didn't know, IMEI stands for International Mobile Equipment Identity, and it's basically a number that's assigned to every mobile device. IMSI is basically the International Mobile Subscriber Identity, and essentially is the identifier for the SIM card on basically which your phone number is tied. So there you go. Now, that kind of data could be actually used to track a mobile device or assist in things like SIM swapping attacks, where someone hijacks your phone number to intercept two-factor authentication codes or other information. Additionally, 5.3 million more postpaid customers have also been identified as part of this breach, but without revealing their driver's license ID or social security number. The same goes for an additional 667,000 accounts of former T-Mobile subscribers that were added to that total. Former Sprint prepaid Boost Mobile customers are still in the clear, however. 52,000 names tied to Metro by T-Mobile were stolen. Unspecified number of files contained phone numbers, IMEI, and IMSI numbers, according to T-Mobile, that did not include any personally identifiable information, which is a questionable claim since it could be easy to tie somebody's identity to their phone based on other leaked data or simply browsing publicly available listings. Now, the FCC already announced it's investigating the incident, and at least one class action lawsuit has been filed against T-Mobile, calling its response and promised 2 years of identity protection service, quote unquote, inadequate. So if you're a T-Mobile subscriber, you really got to check in. Moving on. Let's talk about Lojas Renner. This is Brazil's largest clothing store chain, and they suffered a ransomware attack that impacted their infrastructure and resulted in the unavailability of some of their systems, including their official web store. Suspected of this attack is the Ransom EXX or Ransom X attack gang, and there are unconfirmed reports that Lojas Renner did pay this, so we'll see what happens. Moving on, let's talk about Israel's Bar Ilan University. A cyber attack targeted that university, according to the school. Now, basically, quote, a limited group of computers on our research network faced a small cyber incident, and that's essentially about it. They're saying everything is back to normal, it's no big deal, so hopefully that's it, but heads up, Bar Ilan University students and researchers. Excuse me. A little under the weather today. Now, with that, let's keep moving on because we want to talk about the Research Foundation for the State University of New York, or SUNY. They announced they detected unauthorized access to their networks earlier this year. Now, this was discovered on July 14th and reportedly involved social security numbers. A total of more than 46,700 individuals are said to be impacted by this data breach, although it's not stated whether these people are employees or donors or others linked to the organization. So we'll probably have more information soon, and I'll let you know. Moving on, let's talk about Blackberry. If you didn't know, they actually still exist. Yes, they really do. Now, a flaw in software made by Blackberry has left 200 million cars, along with critical hospital and factory equipment, vulnerable to attackers, and the company opted to keep this a secret for months. This is what not to do, basically. Now, on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, BlackBerry announced that old but still widely used versions of its flagship products, such as its operating system called QNX, contains a vulnerability that can let attackers cripple devices that use it. Other companies affected by the same flaw, dubbed Bad Alloc for allocation, went public with that news in May. BlackBerry opted not to. Now, QNX powers everything from factory machinery to medical devices to rail equipment and components on the International Space Station. So this is a huge thing. And Bad Alloc, the vulnerability, could give attackers a backdoor into many of these devices, allowing these attackers to commandeer them or disrupt their operations. Huge problem. If you find a vulnerability, speed and transparency is the best thing you can do. 200 million cars alone, my God. So, With that, let's move on to the US Census Bureau, because unidentified attackers breached the US Census Bureau servers in January of 2020 by abusing a public exploit from a major vulnerability in the agency's remote access servers, and that's according to basically a watchdog talking about this past Monday. Now, Census Bureau officials said that the hacked servers were not connected to the 2020 census, and the intruders did not have the opportunity to interact with census results. Instead, the attackers breached and only gained access to servers that the agency had been using to provide access to its remote workforce, and essentially an unpatched Citrix infrastructure was to blame. This is why we update. Citrix was aware of this, and Citrix had patches out. They simply chose not to do it in time, and here we are. Moving on, let's talk about almost 2,000 Microsoft Exchange servers, because they've been attacked over the past 2 to 3 days and infected with backdoors after owners did not install patches for a collection of vulnerabilities known as Proxy Shell. Now, these attacks were detected by security firm Huntress Labs, and it's essentially they come after a proof of concept exploit was published online earlier this month, and scans for vulnerable systems began last week. So if you have a Microsoft Exchange server publicly, you've got to make sure you're keeping that thing updated. Again, this is why we patch. Moving on. Let's talk about the Ford Motor Company, because a bug in their website allowed accessing of sensitive systems and obtaining proprietary data, such as customer databases, employee records, internal tickets, etc., etc. The data exposure stemmed from a misconfigured instance of Pega Infinity customer engagement system running on Ford's server. So heads up to you, if you've been to Ford's website looking for a car, registering to buy that new Mustang or whatever you're doing, heads up. And finally, and we have a couple of different finalies. This is not going to be a short video. We need to talk about the Illinois Department of Transportation, because the Illinois government is actually breaching their own citizens. Now, here's what's going on. IDOT, or the Illinois Department of Transportation, purchased access to precise geolocation data of about 40% of Illinois' population from a company called SafeGraph. This is the controversial data broker that was recently banned from Google's App Store. Now, the details of this transaction are described in a publicly available document that were obtained by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. They are doing the cyberlord's work. Now, in an agreement signed in January of 2019, IDOT paid $49,500 for access to 2 years worth of raw location data. Now, the data set consisted of over 50 million pings per day from over 5 million monthly active users. Each data point contained precise latitude and longitude, a timestamp, a device type, and basically a so-called anonymized device identifier. Now, taken together, these points, though, could be easily used to trace the precise movements of millions of identifiable people, millions of Illinoisans. Now, although SafeGraph claimed its basically device identifiers were anonymized, in practice, location data traces are relatively easy thanks to basically the ability to access real-world identity. Now, in response to this public records request, IDOT said that it did not store or process the data directly. Instead, it hired a contracting firm known as Resource Systems Group, or RSG, to analyze the data on its behalf. The contracts with RSG and SafeGraph are part of a larger effort by IDOT to create a, quote, statewide travel demand model, and IDOT intends to use this model to analyze trends in travel across the state and project future growth. Now, IDOT filed an initial procurement justification seeking raw location data from smartphone apps in 2018. In this request, IDOT laid out the characteristics of the data set that it intended to buy. The agency specifically requested, quote, disaggregated device-specific data from within Illinois and a 50-mile buffer of the state, meaning I believe within 50 miles of the border, although I could be wrong. Now, it wanted to use more than 1.3 million monthly active users, which would be at least 10% of the state's population, with an average of 125 location pings per day of each user. IDOT also requested that the GPS pings be accurate to within 10 meters on average. SafeGraph dataset exceeded IDOT's requirements. IDOT wanted to monitor at least 10% of the state's population, but SafeGraph offered 42%. Also, while IDOT only requested 1 month's worth of data for $50,000, SafeGraph offered 2 years of data for the same price, 1 year of historical data plus 1 year of new data, updated at a regular cadence. As a result, IDOT received precise location traces from more than 5 million people for 2 years for less than 1 penny per person. Now, IDOT's purchase from SafeGraph was part of a larger project by the agency to model individuals' transportation patterns. IDOT also worked with HERE Data, another location data broker, and Replica, the company spun off of Google's Sidewalk Labs. And according to IDOT, HERE acquires location data primarily from vehicle navigation services. HERE is owned by a consortium of automakers, including BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes, and it gathers data from connected devices under those brands. So if you're driving a Beamer, anything in Volkswagen, which includes Audi, Lamborghini, Bentley, all these high-end brands as well as Volkswagen, heads up, not to mention Mercedes and Mercedes brands as well. Now, Replica, the other company, has essentially been cagey about its data sources, but reports using, quote, mobile location data as well as, quote, private sources for real estate and credit transactions. Now, as noted, IDOT did not process the data directly. Instead, they shared that raw data with RSG, which was tasked with deriving useful insights for the transportation agency. Now, a memo from RSG to IDOT dated June 19, 2018, specifically requested that IDOT purchase bulk location data gathered from smartphone apps for RSG to analyze. RSG is a prolific consultant in transportation planning. Its website claims it has worked with the most transportation agencies in the U.S. and lists the Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Department of Transportation, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the Florida Department of Transportation, and many others as clients. So this is a huge problem that we have. A lot of the data laws federally here in the United States essentially are antiquated. A lot of them were written in the Reagan era. That's a huge problem here because we don't have the ability to understand that our data is being used in this way. I'm in Chicago. I'm in Illinois. I'm probably one of those 42% that are essentially getting hit. And as I'm driving around Illinois, literally the state of Illinois is tracking what I'm doing. There's a really good chance that I'm in that. And so Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, if you need somebody to represent in a class action lawsuit, give me a call. And finally, and this is the last one we've got, we're going to be talking about the US State Department because they just got hit with a new cyber attack in recent weeks, and this is according to Fox News reporting yesterday. Now, as diplomats' efforts to evacuate Americans and refugees from Afghanistan became ever so desperate, the last thing we want to see is the US Department come under cyber attack because they're the ones that are partially coordinating this with the military. Now, the extent of risk to the department's internal operations currently remains unknown, but officials have insisted that this incursion, discovered by the Department of Defense's Cyber Command, has had no impact in the Afghanistan mission. And I don't know how they could honestly make it any worse. I don't care, what you think of the president or the politics or anything like this. The execution seemed to be rather poor, given the pictures and images and everything else that we've seen coming out here. And the last thing, like I said, we would need is some kind of cyber attack, God forbid, from a foreign adversary trying to make a bad situation even worse. So we will see. But I quote a State Department spokesperson: the department takes seriously its responsibility to safeguard its information and continuously takes steps to ensure information is protected. Pretty generic statement. The department was one of dozens, if you recall, federal agencies and thousands of private data networks that were hit last December in the massive SolarWinds breach. And so it's very possible that somebody had maintained persistence. And given the report that I had talked about in the last week or two, where the U.S. government, especially the State Department, can't account for something like 60% of its technological assets, I'm surprised they're not declaring a data breach every friggin' day. This is a huge problem. The U.S. government is very behind. We need to be spending money to modernize and harden our data networks and infrastructures at the federal level. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have attacks, intrusions, all these kinds of things. It's a huge problem that we have. So I wanted to end with that because it really underscores this continuous issue that we have. And as Americans, we have to make sure that we are letting our lawmakers know that we need to be stepping up our cybersecurity game. So this is my call to action for everybody. Go write your member of Congress and tell them, hey, we don't want to get hacked anymore. We don't want the government to get hacked. We don't want businesses to get hacked. You've really got to start stepping up your game. And here we are. Not that I'm for regulation, but we got to do something. And I think most of you will agree with that. And so those were your breaches of the week. I'm just going to go ahead and say you were affected. Let's just leave it at that. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And thank you for putting up with I think I'm coming down with something. I'm not sure. Probably not COVID. I'm not saying COVID. But as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.